That's going to be rather a lot.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Juliet, and today's video is about my favourite top 10 Margaret Atwood novels. She's written 16 novels altogether, starting in 1969, and her latest novel she published in 2016. The 6 novels that don't even make my top 10 were all published prior to 1980, and they are The Edible Woman, Surfing, Lady Oracle, Life Before Man and Bodily Harm. Just so you're aware, I have read all 16 of her novels. So I'm just going to focus on my top 10, and in particular my top 5 in this video. As I was doing some research for this video, I noticed something, because I haven't read Margaret Atwood's novels in order necessarily, I've just read them as I've come across them, and that's that all of my top 10 were written after The Handmaid's Tale, which is 1985, and of the 6 that don't even make my top 10, they were all written before 1980. I don't know what that says about Margaret Atwood as a writer or me as a reader. I mean, there's 2 reasons, I guess, why I tend to prefer her later novels. The first might be because her novels are often quite culturally and contextually based, because she writes a lot about gender, and her dystopian novels are kind of pulling in the sort of futuristic ideas of the time. So it could be that actually the reason I enjoy her novels post 1980s, because the first novel I read was The Handmaid's Tale in 1985 when I was 15, and therefore the novels are relevant to my life going forward, but the novels written in the 60s and the 70s, maybe I don't relate to them as well. I mean, the other reason could be that Margaret Atwood was also finding her voice up until the 1980s. Certainly her earlier novels, I think, are much more autobiographical. They focus a lot on identity, gender identity, also identity and its disintegration, how we might have split identity, so we show one thing, identity to one person, but hide other aspects of ourselves. And also a lot of the themes are around alienation in her early novels. Certainly Margaret Atwood, though she has said that none of her novels are autobiographical, she was someone that was studying and very academic at a time when women were expected to be in the home and not to be pursuing academic careers. So it could be that her early novels were her way of finding her identity as a writer, and that's why I tend to prefer the later ones. So number 10 has more to do with me, I think, than Margaret Atwood's writing. The novel that is number 10 in my list is Hagseed, which was published in 2016. And I think the reason that I didn't hugely gel with Hagseed, I enjoyed it for what it was, but I didn't hugely gel with it, is because it's a modern retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest. And actually, I haven't read much Shakespeare. I didn't read much Shakespeare at school. I haven't never really got into Shakespeare. I'm sure that's more telling on my part about my lack of literary knowledge. So the Hagseed for me didn't really work because I didn't know The Tempest. So that's the only reason why it's in number 10. I'm sure other people absolutely loved it. Okay, in 9th place, again, this is a relatively modern one, and again I think this has more to do with me and how I read this than the novel itself, and it's the 2015 The Heart Goes Last. Now, I came across this when it was written in a serialised form online, so you got episodes written online, and I guess I found it quite disjointed, and to me it didn't have the same pull as some of her other dystopians that I'll come on to later. I imagine as a full novel, which I haven't read it as, maybe I would have liked it better, because obviously it would have been edited and she would have honed it. But for me, number 9 is The Heart Goes Last. Number 8, or in position number 8 on my list, is Cat's Eye, which was published later. I can't remember the date, I need to look it up. But actually I was reading that Margaret Atwood started writing Cat's Eye in 1964, but then she published it in 1988. So that kind of makes sense as to why it's quite low down on my list, because actually it's one of her earlier novels. So Cat's Eye is the story of Elaine Risley, who is a painter that returns to Toronto for a retrospective of her art. So it's a lot to do with her going back and seeing how she was brought up. And it's really about female friendships and about being accepted or not being accepted. So that's in at number 8. Okay, so in at number 7 is The Robber Bride, and this is a story about 3 friends who it's about 3 friends who meet once a month in a restaurant, and it's really about, it flashes between the present and the past, but to be honest I can't really remember it, which is why I've put it number 7. I do kind of remember one of the characters, Xenia, who was a bit of a professional liar, and I really enjoyed her character, but I can't really say the story stuck with me. And in at number 6 is Alias Grace, which was published in 1996, and this is the story of Grace Marks. So it's a retelling of something that really did happen, and she was convicted of murdering her employer, Thomas Kinnear, and his housekeeper and mistress, Nancy Montgomery. But she is serving life sentences, but she can't actually remember or has no memory of the murders. And this book is really looking at or trying to understand what she might have been through in order for her to have carried out these crimes and why she has no memory of them. So you've got a doctor, Dr. Simon Jordan, who is really up and coming in the field of mental illness. This novel is set in the previous century when mental illness understanding was a lot less than it is now. And it's really about him listening to her story and bringing her back to that moment that she can't remember. And the book is really examining, whether Grace was actually an evil person, whether she was a femme fatale, jealous of the lover, or whether she was just a victim of the circumstances that she found herself in, being a woman of a lowly position at that time. So that one I liked particularly because it looks at mental ill health, which has always interested me in novels, and the idea of memory and how trauma might affect our memory. In at number 5 is The Blind Assassin, and this was published in 2005. And my memories of this novel, I really liked the way it portrayed the main character. Again, it's a novel full of flashbacks, so it starts in the present but also flashes back. I really liked the main character, how Margaret Atwood portrayed her ageing. How, for example, she could never eat a full meal anymore, how food tended to look bigger the older and smaller that she got. So I had to revert to Wikipedia here to actually look up the plot, because I couldn't quite remember what happened. I just remember really liking the main character, whose name is Iris. And it says in Wikipedia, so I am reading from this, the novel takes the form of a gradual revelation illuminating both Iris's youth and her old age, which is the bit that I really enjoyed, before becoming to the pivotal events of her and her sister Laura's life and the time of the Second World War. So it says it's a novel within a novel, and that it's also got some science fiction elements to it. I just like the way it flits around between time. And as I say, I particularly liked the character of Iris. I really thought Margaret Atwood had got into the mindset of an older woman who's, getting very frail and very old, but is also very strong mentally as well. So that's my number 5. So, in at number 4 was the first Margaret Atwood novel I ever read, and that was The Handmaid's Tale, which was published in 1985. And I think I probably read it around about that time, probably when I was more likely, probably 1987 when I read it. And it absolutely blew me away at the time. I think I was just becoming aware of gender stereotypes and how growing up as a woman, the expectations that were put on me, and I think it really made me consider much more carefully how hard fought women's freedoms were, and that we mustn't be complacent about them. And certainly feminism isn't dead, it isn't over, it's something we need to keep working on. I've watched the retelling of The Handmaid's Tale recently on the TV series, and though I've enjoyed it very much, it didn't have the same power to me today as it had in 1985. And I think that's partly because I think the issues it raises around women's equal rights were much more pertinent in the early 1980s than they are today, certainly in the UK, because I think we have come a long way since then. And therefore I found the idea a little bit dated. And actually I think if Margaret Atwood had been writing something like The Handmaid's Tale today, she may have actually decided to flip it around and actually have had women in charge and men sort of pushed into the corner. So I just think The Handmaid's Tale is absolutely brilliant for its time, but I'm not sure it translates as well today. And I think Margaret Atwood's other dystopia that she's written is much more relevant. Which brings me to my top 3. As you can probably guess, based on the fact that Handmaid's Tale is in at number 4, in at number 3 is The Year of the Flood, and that was, oh no, sorry, Mad Adam is that, though to be honest it doesn't really matter which way around it is. Sorry, Mad Adam is at number 3, and The Year of the Flood is at number 2, and I'll come to my number 1 in a moment. And Mad Adam and The Year of the Flood are part of a trilogy of novels, of dystopian novels, which all take a slightly different viewpoint of the same thing that's happening. And I absolutely loved these dystopian novels because they looked at genetic modification, they looked at overpopulation, they looked at what it is to be human, they looked at the impact of religion, and really the story centres around the idea that the world has sort of reached tipping point in terms of population. There is not enough food around for everybody, there are not enough resources anymore, and so there's a mad dash to create synthetic meats and synthetic foods, and there's also this idea that maybe humans have got, you know, we've become too inbred, we don't really care about the world anymore. So you've also got this other story going on of actually maybe we just need to reduce population very, very quickly. And then you've got an alternative story going on of can we actually engineer better humans? And better humans, based in this trilogy, are humans that don't dream, because dreaming leads to religion. And also humans who can only procreate at certain times of the year, because I think there's this idea about, you know, men and women's gender roles, how we get stuck in stereotypes. So therefore, if we're all the same until certain points in the year, a bit like coming into season, then maybe we can get rid of some of these gender stereotypes. So I absolutely loved Mad Adam and Year of the Flood, which brings me to number 1. And actually I've got 2 of her novels in at number 1. Obviously Oryx and Crake has got to be there because that was the first in the trilogy, and that's where you're introduced to the character of Snowman, who has survived this apocalyptic end of the world, and is living up a tree near a beach. And it's not until you get to Year of the Flood and Mad Adam that you realise that the snowman isn't alone, because you actually believe that he's the only human left. And he basically observes the new humans that have been created throughout the novel, and it's quite a bleak novel in the sense that you think he's the only one left and the human race is over. And then obviously you then get to The Year of the Flood and Mad Adam, and the story expands right out, which is what I absolutely loved about it. So obviously Oryx and Crake has to be at number 1, but then there's one final novel left that was published in 2005, and actually it's the retelling of the Odyssey, but from a female feminist perspective. So it's called The Penelope Ad, and it's written in rhyme, very similar to the Odyssey. And though I haven't read Homer's The Odyssey, I did know enough about it, I guess through learning about it at school, through seeing popular films and even popular cartoons, that I understood enough about it for this novel to really, really chime with me. It's about when Odysseus gets back after he's 10 years away, where he's been fighting off the Sirens and the Minotaur and the Cyclops, and he returns home to find his wife Penelope has really basically tried to run the kingdom without him, and she's had to fight off 100 suitors, and things have got a bit out of hand, and so when Odysseus comes back, he for some reason decided going to hang her maidens, who have tried very, very hard to protect Penelope, and she's tried hard to protect them. And the Penelope basically takes the role of the woman and says, well, hang on a minute, you left me alone for 10 years and I did the best I could. And I absolutely love the voice in this. It's a very sardonic, critical feminist voice, and it really blew me away as a feminist novel. And I think it's kind of distilled a lot of Margaret Atwood's feminist ideas into a really funny and clever way of doing it. So that is my top 10 Margaret Atwood novels. Obviously in first place is the Penelope Ad, and then closely followed by the Mad Adams trilogy, which is a dystopia, and in fifth place is the Handmaid's Tale. So as you can see from my choice of Margaret Atwood novels, I tend to have been drawn to her dystopian novels as opposed to her other ones, except for the Penelope Ad, which I just thought was absolutely brilliant. Thanks ever so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this. I shall see you again soon. Bye.